Welcome back to the Mixing Music Podcast. I'm your host, Dee Kei, and today I have a very important topic that I wanted to talk about, something that's been on my mind for, dare I say, years. And this is the first time that I feel like I'm trying to officially articulate this for the public's ear. And part of this is meant to be a little bit provocative. It's meant to be especially motivational. And I want to emphasize and preemptively emphasize that throughout this episode, I'm really hoping that this becomes an episode that you repeat every once in a while to remember what's important for you and to figure out what you value and what you think is important, and how you can align your core, your desires and even your spirit, your soul, or whatever you believe in to align with what you want and what you think is best for the world. This episode is, I'm not sure what to title it yet. I'll figure it out eventually, but is about the purpose of creativity, the purpose of what it means to be a creative, and how you can use your creativity for the positive of this world. I want to start off this podcast by mentioning that this year for the Grammys, I took my wife. I was inducted as a Grammy voting member a couple years ago. And last year I took Lu. We went together. This year, Lu was also inducted last year, so he was able to get his own tickets, but he was unable to go. And this time I took my wife, and she had never really seen anything like that. In fact, it's pretty awesome that we had the opportunity to do anything like that. So it was a cool opportunity. We got to meet a lot of very influential people. I met Pharrell. I met, some cool cats, people that have been on the show. Been trying to get Baines on the show. We saw him there. But anyway, we'll get him on eventually. He's been very, very positive about it. He's just a busy guy. But during the Grammys, if you haven't looked it up already, it wasn't that big of news, but still something that when it happened live in person, I just already saw the headlines. I want to emphasize, this is specific to this situation, but I do want to bring up that, especially something like this where I grew up very religious. I still am religious, very Christian to this day. And, but not like crazy like my parents were, where I admit that I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what's true, but I hope that the things that I believe in are true. That's what faith is supposed to be. We won't get into that. But anyway, in the headlines or on Twitter or on Facebook, you may have seen Sam Smith win a Grammy and then also perform with Kim Petras, Unholy live. Now, the song is really cool, and it's kind of controversial to begin with, I guess, kind of, barely. We've kind of gone past that. But I think the most controversial part was the imagery of he was wearing red with like a top hat with satanic horns, and Kim Petras was on the stage surrounded by fire and red backlight in a cage surrounded by demons, or dancers dressed up as demons. And when it was happening, it was spectacular. It was absolutely incredible. I thought it was one of the most visually impressive and provoking performances of the night. I mean, the other really impressive performance, and this is a big shout out to Questlove, was the 50 Years of Hip Hop. Yeah, you should look that up on YouTube. The 50 years, if you're a fan of hip hop, the 50 Years of Hip Hop commemorative video or performance by so many iconic rappers and groups, put together by Questlove, was phenomenal. You should check that out. But the Sam Smith one especially stuck out to me because it aligned with what I've been thinking about a lot. Actually, not the Sam Smith performance, but more so the speech Madonna gave before he went up, or they went up, before Sam Smith went up onto the stage. Madonna started off and was trying to introduce the act and started off by saying, "Who's ready for some controversy?" And everybody got riled up. Everybody in the audience is, "Woo, yeah, cool." And she said something that I think is incredibly important, especially as a preface to this controversial performance, potentially controversial performance. And I think it is incredibly important. I wrote down the quote, and I'm gonna kind of summarize here. But she said, quote, "If they call you shocking, scandalous, troublesome, problematic, provocative, or even dangerous, then you are onto something." There's something about being creative that is incredibly important to the progress of this world. Let me read you another quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. I may have shared this quote in the past, and I keep this on my phone. It was one of my favorite quotes. This is from writer George Bernard Shaw back in the early 20th century. He said, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." In the world, we often get pushed down, whether it's by our parents, family, friends, even our own egos. We are told to stay within the box. The nail, in Japanese, we say the nail that sticks out is the one that gets hammered, right? And we want to, it's better, more appropriate, it's more reasonable to adapt yourself to the world. And I think that goes a long way. I think that actually does a lot of good in a lot of ways. But I do think that that sort of mindset creates the least amount of progress. I'm not even going to get into politics, but let's talk about art, something that we can all see and look back on historically. When I've brought up time and time again in the past that during the days of Impressionism and Cubism, when these, let's say Monet or Manet would put out these art exhibitions in tents out in the street, and people would come in during their early years and would have genuine, visceral reactions. They were emotionally distraught by oil on canvas and the way that it was, to them, unprofessionally, just uncharacteristically, unreasonably, even potentially blasphemy. Like, why would you do something like this and call it art? And people were upset. And I like to talk about this because at the end of the day, we all recognize now. I mean, they sell Cubist and Impressionist art, like Pollock's, even like kind of that sort of splatter art on Instagram for like you can get one for free from a friend if you wanted to. Like, it's just so normalized now. But there was a time when it wasn't normal, and there were these people that were famous for being crazy enough to do something, delusional enough to do something so out of the norm that it made people upset. And they didn't give up on themselves. They believed in the art. Maybe even so, they were only thinking about themselves and doing things that they enjoyed. Either way, they changed the perspective of the average worldly person to be more accepting of various forms of expression, of talent, allowing people to interpret the way they view the world differently. Maybe even springing up more deep culture even within painting and not. Maybe even going as far as to having some sort of global impact into acceptance of any kind, especially around visual arts. It pushes boundaries. It pushed boundaries, but now it has become normalized. I think this is incredibly important. I think even something as simple as art pushes boundaries in ways that does dive into things that matter in our day-to-day life. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently, specifically the Joe Rogan podcast, Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Labs, which he's a neurobiologist at Stanford. A lot of other educational podcasts, Modern Wisdom by Chris, even some comedy ones. I've been loving Theo Vaughn this past weekend. Anyway, it was really impressive that someone that is so known to be a tough alpha male like Joe Rogan, who's been part of, the fighting scene, when he talks about gay marriage, we've progressed so far along that even someone like him, who moved away from California, has moved to Texas to get away from this left-wing progressive mindset, still cannot comprehend or understand anybody who doesn't support gay marriage. And it's not even, I don't want to talk about the politics of it, but rather I just want to talk about the ideology of something like that, where gay marriage was so far beyond what was okay and acceptable a few decades ago, is now something that even someone like him considers common sense. When a decade or two ago, it was blatantly crazy. Even within my short lifespan, it was blatantly crazy. And it still is to many people. That's how I feel like culture quickly changes all the time. And it's very important. We won't know if we can assume, and I think that there's good assumptions here, but we won't know the negative or positive impact of allowing something like gay marriage until it happens. We just don't know. We can guess, we can do our best historical studies, but when we venture into new unmapped territories, relatively speaking, and within this modern landscape, this modern setting, because talking about the Greeks or other things, and it's not really a good comparison. It's not within the general modern mindset. But when we talk about these things, there's a lot of progress that can be made potentially for the good. And there's been many things for the good. Even the idea of washing your hands before you perform surgery. That was, at the time when that was created, I remember reading that was a crazy, nobody thought that would actually make any sort of difference. But ever since these surgeons and doctors would wash their hands before surgery, the death rate in surgery went down dramatically. And now it's so common sense, but they were thought as crazy in the beginning stages. Things like this. It is without a doubt. Creatives are without a doubt one of the most important members of society, one of the most outcast member of the society, one of the most misunderstood members of society. And that's what we are as music. Musicians and artists, singers are only one small faction of creatives as a whole. Entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur and a starter of a business, creating businesses is also a very highly important part of creativity. You need to be creative to start your own business. That's something that Jordan Peterson talks a lot about. Actually going into Jordan Peterson, there's something that I recommend you all watch and listen to. Jordan Peterson has an hour-long lecture in Canada speaking with a professor of fine arts or the museum curator for the Fine Arts Museum in Canada, something like that, where there are two guys on a stage talking about creativity, the psychology of creativity, and the roles that creativity play within ourselves as individuals, as well as within society. It is incredibly important, I believe, especially as a creative, to listen to dive deep into. I've quoted that lecture many times, including Jordan Peterson saying that most people are not creative and most people shouldn't try to be, meaning that many people, a majority of people would probably be happier not losing everything for something that they think they love. Most people would probably be happier statistically if they kept their day job and had structure than people. There are very few crazy people in this world that love chaos and unreliable income. I'm joking here, but Jordan Peterson, in a different podcast interview, he spoke about creativity, and he said, creatives are 80% of the time, 80 to 90% of the time incorrect. They're wrong. Sometimes it can be dangerous. They're so wrong that it's dangerous. But the 5 to 10% of the time that creatives are right, that something that they say is extreme is right, is so much more valuable than the potential harm that they can cause by being wrong most of the time. Most of us as artists, so let's put it in the perspective of musicians. 90 to 95% of songs that are written by us, and even within our own catalog, kind of aren't that great. Don't really provoke anybody. Don't really generate any sort of thought or provoke individual opinion. It's not very useful. It's just aesthetic. And I think that having aesthetic art is useful in its own sense. But then there's the 5% of songs that we do write, or the 5% of artists out there that continue to write. Songs, make movies, music videos, create dances, create businesses that change the world for the better. And there are times where extremely controversial, extremely provocative creatives are doing something that may seem dangerous from a conservative's standpoint. And I'm talking not from a politically conservative, but value-wise. Their values are much more conservative. Their mindset and common sense is a lot more conservative, which is understandable. Very practical, pragmatic way of looking at life. They may see that as this progressive or creative mindset, thought process is dangerous. Even with all the dangerous things out there that are genuinely, objectively incorrect, it is still worth the 5 to 10% of progress that can be made from the very few times that a crazy creative is right, happens to be right. It's worth it. There's I forgot who says this, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but there's another quote that death to a creative is normal. Whether you've been seen as bad or whether you've been seen as good, the worst thing that can happen to you is to be seen as normal. I do think that many artists that I work with, many creatives that I work with in many fields outside of music, struggle a lot with allowing themselves to do what they really feel inside. This is a very commonplace topic that we talk about allowing, just being true to yourself. I'm not going to go into that because it is such a normal, just talked about over again. But I do think that there's a lot of deeper truth to that than we realize. I do see a lot of artists that struggle to really let themselves out. They try their very best, but every song that they write, it's almost like they're shaving away their outer shell that they're born with. And every song that they write, every step that they take allows them to be a little bit more themselves. I mean, even as an artist myself, when I was growing up, it took a lot of songs written, a lot of shows performed for me to eventually figure out what I liked. Even I didn't know what I like, and I was the one writing the songs. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. With practice, with time, we must, as creatives, it is our duty. It is the duty that we have to society and humanity as a whole to provoke progress through being not crazy. I don't want to throw that word around necessarily, but to invoke thoughts outside of the box, to challenge traditional ideas. And you're probably, statistically speaking, you're probably going to be wrong. But being brave enough to know that you might be, to be smart enough and wise enough to know that if you are wrong, you can recognize and try something else, a different thought. Something that I do all the time is I genuinely sit here in my own time and I have crazy thoughts that I know if I said out loud, people would think that I'm crazy, that I might get canceled for. But I love allowing these thoughts to grow in my mind and to develop shamelessly, allowing these thoughts to develop. And then again, even saying these thoughts out loud to friends to allow them to judge my thoughts, to challenge me back. And sometimes I say some of the most ridiculous, stupid things that never should be repeated ever again. But every once in a while, I'll say something that provokes my friends. We dive deeper into the next level of understanding. And there's a level of progress in a small scale that happens there. A deeper level of understanding for life, for loving ourselves, for good, that happens from something that can initially be seen as crazy. I invite anybody that's listening to the podcast right now to give yourself the patience, the comfort to know that it is okay to go outside the box. It is okay to be provocative. It is okay to do something what makes you and people around you uncomfortable, as long as you think that it is good. Even if it is selfishly so, if you selfishly think it is good, just trying things out. The dangers of cancel culture and calling people out for mistakes that people make is that we slow down progress by making people fearful of making more mistakes. Progress only comes from accelerated mistake making. I do believe that wholeheartedly. And when we, especially as progressive, stereotypically left-wing creatives, intellectuals, even, when we allow that sort of culture of a dangerous place for free thought, it is no longer we're kind of getting over the hump of cancel culture. People are starting to get tired of being sick and tired, which I think is a great place to be. It's a good thing that opinions are free, man, because the cost of progress would be way too much if saying stupid things, making mistakes was not free. This is kind of a slower episode. I'm trying to articulate everything that I've been thinking in a single episode. I'm really hoping that this is coming to you, right? Let's go back to the exact example of Sam Smith. Now, I do think that using the imagery of Satan and demons is a lot less provocative than it was in the 80s. There's an episode of the Things You Should Know, Stuff You Should Know podcast, which I love, about Satanism, which I think you should, or the satanic panic of the 80s that I think is extremely interesting. When it was almost like witch hunting during the Salem witch trials. People were were blaming, pointing fingers at demons and Satan for things that were completely, entirely not even religious. But it became a scapegoat and allowed people to blame personal grievances and blame it on something that doesn't exist. Or sorry, not doesn't exist, but I don't, that was the wrong way to put it, but something that was caused by man, even potentially a neighbor, was then blamed on something that we cannot see, when it was obviously caused by the bad choices of man. Someone that is, that you can actually track down, which is dangerous in itself, right? But anyway, it's the AC/DC, being Antichrist, Devil's Child, or whatever it was, the whole satanic panic, people saying, remember when, was it Twisted Sister was called to court by crazy Christian moms that said, like, hey, that song is about sex and oral sex and it's really bad. But then he's like, yo, that song was about my what was it? It's like, that song was about my bandmate getting his tonsils removed and you took it as oral sex. That's on you. That's not on me. And then she just shut. The whole court just like, it was a stupid thing. It was a great publicity stunt, but it was just a stupid thing. Anyway, this works. This is something that people do on purpose. And the Sam Smith one, I don't think it was as provocative as it would have been if it was like 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago even. But the reason why people keep doing this and using satanic symbols is because it works. Because these Facebook moms will go out there and genuinely tie these things to something to Satan in a way that is so roundabout and unbelievable. Literally, my mom is one of these people. My mom genuinely believes that the elite like do human sacrifices and drink people's blood. And not only does that show how disillusioned you are to reality, but also how people are that sort of social class is so distant and so far away from what you think is achievable, what you instinctively believe is achievable, that you cannot relate to them anymore, and they must be doing something insane or evil. Like, imagine not being able to see yourself succeeding so much that you think that the people are succeeding in ways that are done evil. Like, it's just mind-blowing to me. Sorry, I'm kind of going on a tangent here. But I do think that Sam Smith performance was, although like kind of like low-hanging fruit, it's not as provocative as it could have been. It was just funny to say. I think it's still a very smart move. And this is where I'm going to transition to the podcast into challenging your listeners and artists to do what Madonna says. If you can somehow align your personal values, what you believe is right, even if it is totally wrong, objectively wrong, I don't give a crap. Like, as long as you think it's right, personally, subjectively, you think it's right, and you align that and be able to present that idea brave enough to present that idea in a way that is slightly dangerous, controversial, I think it can only help you. Now, I think that there are extremes that can be taken incorrectly. But even when Will Smith slapped the shit out of Chris Rock, he went up in followers on Instagram by like a significant spike in his followership on Instagram, which is funny. You know, publicity, both wrong or bad, is good publicity, right? Is kind of the phrase there. But then again, we see modern examples of, like, dare I say, Kanye, that it's just, you're really kind of hugging the lines of net positive versus net negative. You know, I don't know if that was a net positive move. I think that's safe to say that was like a net negative self-destructive way. But then again, some of his, like, my brother, who's a deep fan of Kanye, still like became a deeper fan of him. I don't know, but I can only, I don't have the data in front of me, but I can only assume that was a net negative publicity stunt, and we must be careful about that. But in general, it's very, very difficult to do something so extreme that you are just outcast without anybody anywhere in the world that doesn't agree with you in some sense. Even on Twitter, there was this crazy idea. There's this lady on Twitter that was promoting integration, like this crazy concept that no person in their right mind thought about. So I'm not trying to promote this thought, but rather just acknowledge that it exists and talk about the existence of that. Even if you were so out of your mind, well, to me, out of your mind to say what this lady says, which is something along the lines of integration, racial integration obviously doesn't work. The more that Asian, Black, Hispanic, white people get together and try to integrate, the more racial tension it causes. It's obviously, we've had enough time to show that it doesn't work. Let's go back to segregation for the purpose of creating more peace. Like, when I read this or thought this and I looked into this, it was just like something, there was a part of my mind that have never, like, there's neural pathways that had never ever been like connected before. And I was just like, holy crap. And it doesn't matter whether or not it's right or wrong. And the point is not to promote this thought. I don't want people to think that that's okay way of thinking, but rather, even to this day, she gains followers all the time. Like, if you say something so deranged and crazy, that is, I mean, statistically speaking, probably incorrect in the long term. But even if you say something as crazy as that, there's going to be people that hear your thoughts and agree with you, stand by your side. Oh, maybe that's a really bad example because then, I mean, on a personal subjective belief system, I don't think that that's correct. And I think that that's pretty dangerous. And you can say that even if you say something dangerous, you can help rally people that think similarly dangerous things. But then again, maybe that's important. If we allow a thought to fester and to grow, then it gives us the opportunity to put the limelight and attention on a topic and to critically think about it, to then come as a society to critique, judge, even go through the scientific process of figuring out if this is methodically, objectively incorrect and not good for society. So at the end of the day, even if it does create small subsects and groups of people that seemingly take away from what feels like progress, I do think that in the end of the day, in the long term, it could create progress. I'm not at all inviting you to think that way or at all promoting this thought, but it was just so interesting to me that a thought like that is like something that I know some listeners have like thought about it before. I know that when it comes to racial tensions, I've been in many like even college level classes that were about racial tension and integration and trying to figure out, pretty cultural acceptance kind of classes that we talked on, not exactly in that way, but we talked about how we can further progress interracial relationships for progress. And these are, that's an extreme way of thinking about it, but like these are things that we do think about. Like you would be dumb to admit, you'd be lying to admit that these kind of thoughts have never come across your mind. It's just crazy that someone said it out loud. This is why I love comedy so much. Comedians are especially great at putting their careers on the line to say things that everybody has somehow thought about, but have never dared to say out loud. And most of the time, these comparisons and thoughts that these comedians are having are absolutely batshit wrong and crazy. But I mean, I think it's still important to think about these ideas and then allowing these ideas to grow to then eventually determine holistically if they're good or bad. But we don't know. Even if I think that the dumb thing, the low IQ thing to do is to hear a thought, no matter how crazy it is, and then shut it down immediately. I do think that in order for progress to be made, we have to let seemingly incorrect thoughts, dangerous thoughts, allow them to at least give them time within ourselves to grow and to find out if they do have a practical use. Now, there are some thoughts that I do think are just genuinely not good, and we're not going to go into that. For example, something that I know affects a lot of people within the creative space is thoughts of self-harm. Those things are extremely dangerous, and you should, if it gets that bad, call 911 or go to a doctor, go to a hospital. But even at the very least, see a therapist. These things are very, very important and are just incorrect or not beneficial for humanity as a whole, or at least for, man, I mean, that's such a touchy subject, right? Like death like that is so scary. I mean, but if you're listening to the podcast right now, if you're still listening, I think that it's safe to say that I'm started going on a tangent. We're not talking about music at all anymore, art at all anymore, but you're allowing me to think thoughts out loud, and then I'll probably listen to this episode in a year or two, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. But I'm probably not going to delete this episode, more so to remind myself and to show others that it's healthy to think and to be creative. So going back to music and as an artist, as a creative, I want to again kind of plant this seed within your mind to allow yourself to unapologetically be you, to unapologetically be unreasonable. And maybe one or two of you, maybe more, will change the world in a way that in 1,000 years from now, we will look at our history books and we cannot even believe that that's how we used to think. The idea of this is something that Americans talk about a lot because it's fairly recent. I mean, is owning the owning of other human beings. Now we see that as obviously incorrect. Like it's been so many generations past when that was okay that it's just we can't even fathom or understand how that could have been a pragmatic solution at the time. That it was that was a way of thinking that was okay. We just can't even fathom that. Imagine being the type of creative that was bold enough to say something so crazy as to say that I don't think that that's right, which then incited civil war. The thought of not owning of equal human rights was so crazy that America as a country did something that we are not even, I don't know if we're that close to, but we can't even fathom doing now, which is killing each other within our own country to prove a point. It's crazy. I do think that progress is dangerous, is damaging, but only in the short term. Only in the short term. This is something that I've been thinking about. I do hope that I do think that there are ways to create progress as musicians. That's the beautiful thing about doing music, is that the way that music incites change, inspires change, is very relatively safe. There's only so much provoking that you can do in a 2 to 5 minute song with thoughtfully crafted lyrics. And there's only a few people, fans of your music or of music in general, that take the time to sit down and actually dive deep into what you meant by your lyrics. Most creatives are overwhelmingly positive. Even Beyonce's album, Sam Smith's album, was overwhelmingly positive. Positive music about self-acceptance. Lizzo is on that shit right now. She's doing such a great job about self-acceptance. I do think that we are in a very interesting crossway for creatives and I'm proud to be a musician here because it is such a positive creative outlet. In whole, I think, in the whole. And there's very few people, like when people hate musicians, it's not because of their music, it's usually because of the way they dress, the way they present themselves. Music has been my therapist, has probably been your therapist. And it can, and I started doing music because I wanted to actually be a psychologist or a therapist and help people out. As I've had mental health issues, and I know many other people have, and I wanted to help people. But then I remember all of those years that I cuddled next to the radio, listening to 96.3 in Chicago, and just being healed by these R&B artists, these pop artists, being healed by them. Feeling like I know I could do another day at school, that even if my grades are bad or that my friends are bad or something's going on, that I could make it another day. It was music. And music doesn't touch everybody like the way it did for me, for probably you. But it's a lot more scalable than treating one patient in therapy at a time. And that's why I became a musician. When it comes down to it, I wanted to do music because I thought it was scalable therapy. I can write one song that can forever change the life, even save the life of another human being, maybe even a couple dozen human beings. I want to end this episode with a very heartwarming story, and also a story that used to be pretty shameful for me, but I love to tell the story. It's very close to my heart. It's very real. I used to do open mic nights in Utah when I had a studio in Utah. And there was a bunch of artists that came through. It was a hip-hop open mic night. The reason why we did hip-hop open mic night is because Swearing was not typically allowed in most venues or recording studios in Utah because it's Utah. Don't get me started on that. So we want to do a hip hop open mic night. It wasn't exclusive to hip hop musicians or rappers. It was just uncensored. But the target marketing was for these rappers to come together and promote hip hop in a safe space. I don't like that word necessarily, but in a inviting space. There you go. And I remember there was one artist that sang an acoustic song. She performed on an acoustic guitar. It was almost folky. This is after these rappers had done these bangers. She performed well, but I remember the entire time she was performing, I was thinking about myself. I had selfish thoughts like, she's ruining the vibe. This is making me look uncool. It's not really helping the music scene the way that I intended. She finished her song. I wasn't even paying attention to her melodies, to her lyrics. I couldn't pay attention because I was obsessively thinking over how it was detracting from what I wanted, what I was hoping to get out of it. And there was a rapper sitting next to me. He writes music that's, pretty hard, pretty not sensitive necessarily. Doesn't typically write vulnerable music, we'll just say that. And he spoke up. One of the only times he ever spoke up during these open mic nights, because he came every once in a while, and he said, I don't know if I've ever said this before, but in this moment right now, that song just changed my life. And then in that brief moment, there was a new feeling that swept over me. A feeling of guilt for not being able to listen to that singer-songwriter. A feeling of understanding, of love, of acceptance, of empathy. That's something that I thought was so stupid to me. Changed the life of another person that I judged and said, I thought maybe that their lives, they wouldn't want to change their lives. They're not vulnerable enough. They're not into that sort of stuff. He's just a hardcore rapper. He doesn't like that sort of stuff. It changed my life, man. Changed my life. I will never forget that moment. I still don't remember what her song was about. I don't remember her lyrics. But the fact that she was brave enough to go to the studio to perform a song, and she was very insecure about it, changed that man's life right next to me. And I was blinded by a lack of empathy, by a lack of understanding, by selfishness. There are many listeners right now, artists in the world, that write songs to nobody but themselves, maybe not even their family or their friends. They don't even write it for social media. But they cry, they yell, they are sincere, they're honest. Every artist here, you need to release your music. You need to be in an uncomfortable situation and allow your expression to change the lives of those who are desperately in need for change. Sometimes it is not the song or the lyrics. Sometimes it is just your bravery of doing something as crazy as being on a stage performing for people that you don't know. Sometimes it's something as crazy as just releasing a song on SoundCloud with no expectation of ever being heard. You can change a man's life, change a person's life. You can. And who are you to deny? Who are you to deny to change another person's life by withholding your art, with your expression? Who are you to be so selfish to say that you are not good enough and you don't feel confident enough to disallow someone else who needs your words? Who are you? to prevent someone else from healing. Thank you so much for sticking around this crazy ride. There's a lot more. I think that this is a topic that we can go deeper in. Thank you so much for listening. We used to do a lot more episodes like this, just more thoughtful episodes like this back in the day before we started doing technical tips. If you like this sort of content, please let me know. If you like this sort of content, hit us up on Discord, DM me on Instagram, email me, get in touch with me somehow, because I'm doing what is best for the podcast. And to be honest, every time we talk about Pultec EQs or something like that, the numbers go up. So we're less and less motivated to do episodes like this. But I've also know that it's needed for some people. I'm sorry if I say crazy things, but at the same time, I'm not sorry. And I hope, and I invite everybody here to say and think crazy things. I'm still learning. I make mistakes. I will never judge another man for mistakes that they make. Another man or woman for mistakes that they make. In fact, I invite everybody, if we're going to make safe spaces, I want to make a safe space for mistakes. That's something that we say at the studio. Safe space for mistakes. I'm not going to be that parental figure to my children that gets mad at them for making mistakes, but rather giving them the opportunity to clean up and learn from themselves. There's only so much that I can do. Man cannot convince man. Man can only convince themselves. That is both psychologically true and scripturally supported. So, on that note, I hope everybody has the best of days. Everybody has the healing and comfort they need. Everybody has the audacity to provoke someone, to be seen as shocking, scandalous, troublesome, problematic, provocative, and dangerous. I wish upon you the confidence and the bravery to be able to do something like that. And on that note, I say happy mixing, my friends, and stay saucy.